1878 Vikings, invasions of England. I said invasions because the plural is important and really draws the pace of the game, as you will see. This is a new game in a system that used to be called Birth of America, now it's called Birth of Europe. So if you play previous games by Academy systems such as 1812, 1775, 1754, you know most of what you need to play this game. It's based on the same system, based on the same general concepts, with enough new things to make this game not just a clone of the previous ones, but to also depict the different themes that we have here. So if you play previous games in the Birth of America / Birth of Europe system, then it's going to be no problem whatsoever for you to learn this game and start playing it in no time. If you haven't played those games, this game is like its predecessors, is not complicated at all, just a couple of pages, very intuitive rules. And also what's important, a lot of work has been done to hardwire unique thematic abilities into the dice. That is, to make sure that the berserkers act the way they should. You do not have to remember a lot of rules that you need to implement. You roll the dice, the custom dice that group comes with, and simply the icons that they roll will make the theme happen, will make the troops represented by those dice act the way they should thematically. So we have here, again, a very strong dichotomy, English versus Vikings. We have two sides and four factions. The English are divided into groups of clans, and the Vikings are divided in the regular clansmen and then the maniacs, the berserkers that they're convinced they're immortal. They are going to take a lot of hits, but they're also going to deliver a lot of hits in the process. All four factions need to be played in all games, so the game works ideally with 2 or 4 players, potentially 3. We give both factions of a side to 1 player, but that's weird. And 4 is ideal because then 1 player per faction, each player concentrates on that faction only, and you have very nice interaction within the team and then against the teams. So the sides will win, not the factions individually. And differently from other games in the system, here you have a very strong defender-attacker dichotomy. The Vikings will come invading, one invasion after the other will come with mighty large armies that will really punch very hard the English in the face, and English will have to put themselves together after that shock and try then to counterattack and to find ways to figure out where the Vikings are weak, because as the Vikings advance into English territory, they will have to stretch their lines, and that's what opens opportunities for counterattack for the British. But before I give you too many spoilers about my conclusions, let's take a closer look at Vikings 1878 and how the game works. This is the board of the game. It looks really nice, and it is also clean, very easy to use, very readable. I like it a lot. It represents England. Only English units are on the board at the beginning of the game. The map is divided in shires, which are these individual areas here, which are then grouped in regions, and they are indicated by different colors, and there are different effects that may target one region rather than another. Most areas that you see here are playable, with the exception of that kind of area there. Those are marsh areas. They are playable only if there is a scenario rule that allows you to do so, otherwise they're out of play. Another thing that is important on the map is cities. Actually, there are 2 types of cities: regular cities and reinforcement cities. Regular cities, well, they don't do anything, they just give victory points to the Viking player, if the Viking player, or say the Viking faction, takes control of them. The other one, the reinforcement city, also gives points to the Viking player, but then also allows the English player to place reinforcements there if they have control of the city. So basically, when, say, the blue English faction goes, then the player controlling that faction places a blue miniature in each reinforcement city that they control, and 1 for each icon there. So I could play 2 blue there, find the blue player, and I'm activated, and that is my turn. So we have two different factions, I should say 4 factions divided in 2 sides. The English divided in 2 different clans, and the Vikings divided in 2 groups, the Norsemen and the Berserker. You set up the game, if you're playing Single Scenario, as you see here, following icons that tell you where the English player places their unit on the board at the beginning, and then pretty much you're ready to start. I'm gonna tell you the general concepts of the game, which are very similar to other games in the series, so if you're familiar with games in the system, you'll be very familiar with the rules in general. The idea is that each player has a unique deck of cards. Some cards are special events, like the 2 cards that you see here, and most cards actually are movement cards, like these ones here. Movement cards have 2 numbers printed on the left side. The number on top is the number of armies that you can move when you play that card, and the number at the bottom is the number of areas, of shires, by which you can move each army. So if I'm the blue player and I'm playing this card, I can move up to 3 armies, and each army can move up to 2 areas. And when I'm moving, I can also move units belonging to my friend to the other faction on my side, as long as I'm also moving at least one of mine. So if I'm the blue player, as an army, I could move this one, say, there. When you move, you have to stop if you enter an area that contains enemy units, and after you resolved all of your movements, you will have to resolve battles in all areas that contain units belonging to both sides. Each side, each faction has a unique set of dice, and then simply put, the factions that have units in the battle will roll dice, and different dice have different combinations of symbols, and that is a great way of hardwiring different capabilities and limitations of the various factions. But in general, the symbol here, when you roll one of these, it means that you inflict a hit on the opponent. The opponent needs to remove one of their units. This is a flee. One of your own units leaves the battlefield, goes in that area, and will come back next time that you activate as a reinforcement. Then we have the tactical result. That means you can choose to move one of your units from the battle into an adjacent area that you control. Very important. And these are the main. Yeah, this should be it. But again, different parties do different things because they have different combinations. And pretty much, and the defender rolls first, and pretty much you keep rolling, alternating rolling, inflicting hits, moving units to your flat area, possibly relocating units in case you decide to use tactical results. You continue like this until in each area where there is a battle, there are only units belonging to one side. Another interesting thing is that when the English player is defending in a city, the English player can summon the city militia. This is another party or an extra faction. It is represented by yellow pieces, and it has a deck. So when the English player is defending in an area with a city, the English player draws one of these cards, and that tells you the number of these militia units that you can add to the battle. In this case, for example, 4. I place them there. And for this battle, I have 4 extra defenders. They have their own dice. They're not very reliable. There are a lot of flee results, a blank result, and 1 in 3, I believe, is a hit. Yeah, 1 in 3 is a hit that you inflict on the opponent. Not very reliable, yes, but they can also be useful to absorb some hits from the opponent. So this is the general idea, and again, if you play the games in the system, you're probably there isn't anything too shocking here. Movement cards, you have to play 1 each time that your faction activates. Action cards, you play whenever it applies. For example, this one can be played during the Viking battle, this one can be played during the English battle, this can be played when this faction receives reinforcements. And what are you trying to do? As the Viking, you're trying to take control of as many cities as possible, and as the English, you're trying to prevent the Vikings from doing precisely so. There's a number of control markers here. each time that the Viking player takes control of a city, say, boom, here, you take the leftmost marker from this track here, and you place it in the city they do not control. Hooray! And maybe later they take control of this city here. Boom! Hooray! If at the end of any round the Vikings have control of 14 cities on the board, they win the game at that point. Otherwise, starting from round 5, there is a possibility of a treaty. Similarly to other games, each player has a treaty card in their deck. Again, also remember, each player has different decks that do different things. If a faction has played their 2 treaties, the game will end at the end of that round. And if the Viking players are controlling 9 areas or more, they win. If the English at that point are controlling, have prevented the Vikings from controlling at least 9 areas, then the English win the game. So this is the general idea, but then now there is a new concept that really changes the game, and the concept is leaders. Leaders have a card that indicates how many units that leader controls, and a unit and a cardboard token with a base so that can stand vertically on the board. At the beginning of the game, the Vikings always receive this leader here, which comes with 17 Norsemen and 8 berserkers. That is one heck of a scary army. Then each round they will get a new one coming out of that deck, a new leader coming out of the deck that is with a new token and another army. As you can see, these are pretty large armies. These guys, when they invade, they're bringing people with them. They're not just going in small groups. Also, you probably knew this, but with the exception of turn 1, in which the Norsemen go first, and then the other players activate randomly, each turn the 4 players will activate randomly. There is a cube for each faction in that bag, and you pull a cube out randomly, and that determines who activates next. So it's entirely possible that one of the factions gets a bunch of activations in a row. Back to talking about leaders, the English only get 1, and that dude only enters the game in turn 5. Again, they get 1 each turn. And remember, what you see on the card represents the men that are actually with him. So all that monster army there, all that horde there is where this guy is. So right now, suppose I'm the Viking player, I play a card, a movement card, I move there because I'm invading, I can invade from coastal areas, and then after I move there, I spend another movement to go there, and I start the battle. Now, the big difference when it comes to leaders as opposed to regular armies that don't have leaders is that first leaders must activate first. So if you activate an army without a leader that turn, well, then you cannot activate the leader. You activate your leaders if you have any, and you decide to, then you activate regular armies. Another important thing is that armies controlled by leaders can drop off and pick up units as they go, which standard armies cannot. So suppose I landed there, now I'm moving there, I'm spending my second movement to get there, and I'm dropping off these people, then I have a battle, and then the interesting thing is that if the leader wins the battle, the leader can keep moving. Isn't that amazing? Yes, it is. Again, that usually doesn't happen. An army without a leader starts a battle, and then whether the army wins or loses the battle, that's it. You don't get to move them again. However, if the leader wins the battle, during the first round of combat, that's great. They can keep moving. If it takes them more than 1 round, for each round past the second, they are spending a quote-unquote movement point. For example, if the Vikings are playing this card, 1 to move here, 1 to move there, they use 2, and they have 2 movement points left of these 4 here. If they wipe these guys out in a single round, now they have 2 more. Suppose it takes them 2 rounds, then pretty much they spend their 3rd movement point fighting this long battle, and then they have one movement left. So this is a very important mechanic, because that means that the Viking players coming in with these gigantic hordes, and especially turn one, when the defenders are scattered, they're just gonna drive a massive wedge into the English territories, which may take different shapes depending on where they decide to land. So they're gonna go and just go very deep. However, remember, for them to retain control of an area, they need to leave somebody behind. So it's true, they can go on some pretty long and impressive marches into enemy territory, but they have to leave somebody behind. If they just leave a symbolic representation, well, then it's very likely that the English will be able to take that back next turn. So pretty much that's how the board may look like at the end of the first Viking movement, and then suppose they get here or something like that, or maybe they want to stay here. So as you can see now, the Viking army is thinned out considerably, although this is still a pretty mighty force. But if the Viking player wants to take control of several areas, which they need to do in order to win, they necessarily are going to stretch their forces. So pretty much it's going to be the Vikings are going to punch and punch and punch, and the English are going to try to take that punch, to roll with it, and to prepare ways of counterattacking and retaking lightly defended areas controlled by the Vikings. And this really is the general idea of the game, but also the general flow, the general pace. Deal with these monstrous invasions if you are the English player. Do as much as you can with them if you're a Viking player, and then try to prevent the opponent from gaining too much ground, from retaking your conquest. And again, as the English player, pretty much you have to stay in the game. I mean, it's the burden of the attack is on the Vikings. As the Viking, you're trying to take control of a lot of areas as soon as possible, and depending on how well you do that, that is how the game is determined, that is how the outcome of the game is determined. I really like this game. I like it a lot. I liked its predecessors, and frankly, I wasn't sure that I needed a fourth game in the same system after I already had three, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, I need a fifth, a sixth, and a seventh. This system is revealing itself to be more flexible than I expected at first. It really is. I thought that the system was a recipe, but it's an ingredient. The idea of, you had the treatises, you have the dice and the card play with the armies that move, but it's more like an ingredient, like chicken, that you can cook in so many different ways. And you can recognize, of course, the flavor across the different dishes, but the experience is very, very different. So what I like about this game is that if you play the previous games, you almost know how to play this one. You had to add the leaders and the invasion factor, which is not entirely different, by the way, from the way, say the English reinforced in 1775. Really, the leaders are the new thing here. And of course, you have new effects unique to this specific theme, but nothing particularly complicated. And what you liked in previous games in the system is still here. The fact that the dice are so thematic, the fact that theme happens, you do not have to worry about a million different rules. And so simply by rolling the dice of your faction behaves in a certain way. You have this strange magical intersection between the strategic, or at least the operational level, and almost the tactical level, because you really get the sense that you're moving armies on a large map, and when there's a confrontation, the berserkers get to take a hit first. And so you really get the image in your head of the charge of the berserkers taking the brunt of the first confrontation, but also leaving a lot of bloody enemy troops on the ground. You really get the sense, like you had in previous games in the system, of these constant clashes between the two sides. Somebody flees, somebody dies, a commander decides to redeploy some units into another area. It's surprisingly tactical for a game that also at the same time feels operational and strategic. Really remarkable that. So I like that. I like as I said, the dice. To me, that is just a phenomenal idea. And I really like the card play, how the cards constrain you, give you some freedom, but then, of course, following Clausewitz's idea that, war, of all the human activities, the most similar to war is a game of cards, because war is all about opportunities that come and go, about dealing with whatever resources you're handed, and you didn't choose them necessarily, doing the best that you can under the circumstances that you stumble upon. That is the quintessence of war. And in a very simple, even abstract, but mechanically, functionally effective way, this limited hand of cards that you have manages to portray the uncertainties and the fog of war. I really like those restrictions there. And maybe there will be a game, they'll be like, gee, I was really forced to play my armistice, my peace treaty when it was the worst possible moment, so be it. And maybe there will be a game where Lady Luck really gives the victory to somebody else, but then the next game maybe she gives it to you, or there will be enough games that, in the long run, if you played enough, things should even themselves out. And again, that's what it should be. That's what it should be in war games. There should be a random element. And I like what I find here. There's like just enough. You really have enough randomness due to the die rolls. Oh, those of course will be terrible. But in the course of an evening, you will win some battles you didn't expect to win, and you will lose some battles that you were sure you're going to win. So again, in the big picture, things will even themselves out. So you have really nice balance here, in my opinion, between the dice and the cards, between random elements. But then you do feel that, of course, managing your troops well, studying the map, exploiting weak points. The English player cannot defend everywhere, but at the same time, the Viking player cannot attack everywhere, because the more they attack and the more they march, the easier it is for the English player to counterattack. But then, especially in later invasions, the Vikings may come from different directions. So there's always uncertainty in them. That uncertainty is not random, it's based on who knows what the opponent is going to do when everybody has so many options. But it's still very exciting, and it's still very fun, and actually kind of like empowers you, because you do get the sense that, well, you can still pull some tricks out of your sleeve. You can still throw a curveball to your opponent, and that feels very rewarding when you're able to do so. So really fun, really good system. I like it a lot, and it feels different enough from the other games that definitely it deserves a position, a place in your collection. If you like the previous games, do yourself a favor, try this one, because it's excellent. It feels close enough to the other ones that if you like those, you're likely to like this one too. But at the same time, it's its own thing, different pace, different flow, different interactions, different map, different units. It is a different game. It is different enough that, again, you don't feel that it's just a redundant game in your collection. I like the components. One minor gripe is I would have preferred cubes rather than these little miniatures. Yeah, they look cute, but of course they keep falling over. They look like disorganized, messy bunches unless you spend a lot of time standing them up on the board, which I do. It really bothers me. I start thinking, oh my gosh, those units, why are they dead? Are they starving? Where are they laying down? Oh no, they're perfectly okay. For a game where you're grabbing units and moving them around, taking off the board, putting on the board like this, as opposed to, say, a tactical unit where you're moving a miniature on a board, or for a game that has this dynamic move around, take, remove, add, I would have preferred cubes. It's just more practical, cleaner gameplay, and it still looks very thematic, very, very beautiful. A minor thing, I may just replace those little toy soldiers with the cubes. Other than that, I have absolutely no complaints about this game. It's fun, it's different from the previous ones, it's challenging, there are a lot of options, a lot of decisions for all players, a lot of things to do, different way of exploring gameplay. I don't see this game becoming samey anytime soon, because the Vikings attack here, or attack here, or attack here, different situation entirely. The English player plays a card that allows them that doesn't allow them to attack in a certain area, different situation entirely. You really have, I think, great replay value, great a great idea and a great design. I had a lot of fun playing this game. This is definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite one, in the Birth of Europe / Birth of America series. And seeing how the system keeps renovating itself, I'm even more excited now in seeing where the system goes next. Gallic Wars, 30-Year War, so many different options that could work. The Renaissance Wars, the Italian Wars of the Renaissance. Exciting system, and I'm more excited now after seeing this different implementation that I even was before. 1878 Vikings, truly great game.